Okay, all right then. So I think what we'll do is we'll make a start. So welcome everybody. Fantastic to have you along to the second of our virtual insight series here at Solent University. My name is Dr. Sarah Hillier. I am a registered nutritionist and I'm the part of the Solent Nutrition team here at Solent University. And I'm joined by my colleague today, Chris Dunn. So Chris, do you want to say hello?
Hi, I'm Chris, and I'm a senior lecturer in public health at Solent University, and I also teach some food sustainability topics. It kind of crosses over into public health quite nicely.
Perfect. Today's topic is really going to be about could Friday night steak night be ruining the world? So just a little few admin points before we get going. This is going to be recorded. So that we're able to use it for marketing purposes, but of course you guys are all on mute and not got your cameras on, so hopefully you won't be involved. But we do really welcome sort of some discussion with you guys. The reason we put this live is so that we have some interaction with everybody. So if you're familiar with Zoom, and by this point in lockdown hopefully you're definitely familiar with it, there is a chat function. So if you've got any questions or queries that you want to ask Chris or I as we go through the slides, by all means feel free to sort of type them in there, and we've got some time at the end of today's session to talk about some of the topics that you guys are sort of asking us, and also we've had some pre-submitted questions as well, so Chris and I will go through those. First of all then, I'll sort of give you a bit of an overview of the topic in terms of the talk. So before we do that, just to sort of give us a little bit of a plug in terms of how to connect with us here at Solent Nutrition. We have all of the social media platforms, and we'd really welcome you guys to give us a like or a follow. You name it, we've probably got the channel. So Facebook, Twitter, Instagram are all the big popular ones, but of course the professional LinkedIn and our website, of course. So do feel free to give us a like and a follow. And on our platforms, we start to sort of discuss some of these topics in more detail. We have the students giving some sort of really fantastic recipes and top tips when it comes to food sustainability and plant-based diets, which has sort of been the themes of the last two Virtual Insight series talks that we've had. So what we're going to be talking about today in terms of the actual overview, Chris?
Oh, sorry. Next slide.
What we're going to be talking about today in terms of our overview is really this topic about food sustainability. And of course, we've given the title about could Friday night steak be ruining the world? But of course, we're going to not necessarily just focus on Friday night steak, but we are really going to be talking about food systems and the sort of nutrition elements to that, and whether these are sustainable for the rise in global population that we're going to be seeing in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years time. Of course, we're going to be focusing on meat consumption, and that's where our link to our Friday night steak comes in. What's the impact of that on our environment, and what does that mean for us in terms of things like greenhouse gases and climate change? And then, of course, as all healthy and important scientists and understanding this as nutritionists and public health specialists we want to know what are the alternatives for our meat consumption, what are the options that we have available, and Chris is going to be really exploring some of those, and some of them we're really keen to hear what you guys think. Would it be something that you sort of move into? And of course we're going to finish off with some Solent Nutrition top tips and obviously take your questions. So that's what we're going to cover today in about 20 minutes, so sit back and relax, and Chris is going to take the controls. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Sarah. Okay, so starting off, so I'm going to frame some issues around sustainability in the global food system. So kicking off, we've got currently in the world 7.8 billion people, and this is growing. Not growing quite as fast as back in the 1960s when the population growth rate hit its peak, but still growing nonetheless. And population growth isn't even either. In the developed countries, such as the UK, we're seeing a decline in birth rates, slowing down, but in the developing countries, birth rates are still accelerating. So population growth isn't even, but even so, we're looking, it's predicted we're going to reach 9.7 billion people by 2050, which is quite a lot of people. So what's the problem with 9.7 billion people? Well, you have to feed everyone. You have to feed them all. And the problem is we're currently not even feeding everyone. There's about 800 million people who go hungry in the world. So the predictions are we're going to have to increase food production by between 60 and 100% by 2050, which is quite an enormous increase in food production. And the issue here is that already agriculture contributes about 30% of the greenhouse gases, which is driving climate, or the climate crisis, or climate change of climate crisis. Agriculture we already use 50% of the world's habitable land for agriculture, and agriculture uses 70% of the world's fresh water, so rivers, lakes, groundwater, that type of thing. So already agriculture has an enormous impact on the planet. So this is a really big challenge, a really complex problem, and we have a really big question around this. How do we feed this growing population without accelerating the climate crisis and using up the world's resources? So again, it's complex. It's a very complicated system with many different inputs and outputs and things to look at. So the key question really is, how will food systems nutritiously and sustainably feed 9.7 million people by 2050? So today we're going to concentrate on the production side. We're going to look at food waste towards the end as well. But in terms of production, how can we minimise the impact on the environment when we produce food? And with food waste, how can we, waste less of what we've already produced? These are two areas that really could be far more efficient and are part of the solution. Again, it's complex, and they are only part of the solution. So, as Sarah mentioned, we're going to look at meat consumption and look at trends and environmental impacts. Again, complex picture, but just one part. Now, my video is slightly blocking this, but I'll just move it over. So we said the world's population is growing, and just because of that, the demand for meat will increase. Back in 2010, the world consumed 300 million tons of meat, and this is predicted to double by 2050. Now, again, like with population growth, the consumption of meat across the globe, it's not even. There's different trends. So in high-income countries, like the UK, the trends are actually kind of tailing off, becoming a bit more static or even slightly declining because of consumer changes in consumer attitudes towards consuming meat. In the middle-income countries, this is where we're seeing strong demand. So the middle classes are increasing, people's incomes are increasing, and people can afford to eat meat. Also, in the process of globalization is not just the kind of the trading of goods and services across the world, but also ideas and culture. So the idea of the kind of Western diet as the diet of successful countries means that more people want to eat the Western diet. Traditional diets are declining. So again, apart from the videos blocking the trend, you can see China is really, really accelerating in terms of its meat consumption. With low-income countries, well, because meat is expensive, the demand is still low, and there could be cultural reasons why certain countries don't eat so much meat. So that's the picture in terms of demand. Demand is going to grow significantly. So let's try and get this so that we can see. So what's the problem with that? Well, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, animal-based foods were responsible for about 66% of agricultural greenhouse gas emissions. And as we saw, agriculture contributes about 30% of all the greenhouse gas emissions in the world. So let's have a look at this, this graph here, which you might begin to see the problem as we look at it. So along the bottom, we can see different foodstuffs. You've got wheat, rice, maize, pulses. To the left of the dotted line, plant-based foods, and to the right of the dotted line, you've got animal-based foods, so fish, eggs, pork, poultry, dairy, and beef. Now, all these coloured bars are representing different impacts. So if you look at the key of the left, we can see it's land use, is it pasture land or cropland, fresh water use, and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, looking at the graph, you can see that there's one outlier that is very, very intensive, and that's beef. Okay, even compared to other animal foods, beef is incredibly resource intensive, and even if we stopped eating a little bit, even if we stopped eating beef, that would make a big impact in terms of demands on global resources, and shifted to other forms of meat. So, of course, plant-based foods are much lower in terms of their resource consumption. So you can start to see now some of the issues around beef in particular. So let's move this over. So if we look at greenhouse gas emissions per 1,000 kilocalories, again, same sort of trend. This includes CO2, but also it includes methane, and methane is produced by cows and sheep in terms of their digestion and waste. So if we look at the graph, again, the most intensive forms of food in terms of releasing greenhouse gases is beef herd. So that's beef to eat meat rather than beef to use as producing milk. So beef is an outlier again, compared to all other forms of animal food, and of course plant-based foods, which produce far less greenhouse gases per 1,000 kilocalories. So you can start to see why eating beef might be a bit of a problem in terms of environmental resources. So that's the environment, but there's also another problem. This is food security. So we've already mentioned there's 7.8 billion people on the planet, but there's also 22.5 billion livestock animals that we grow to slaughter and eat. There's about 1.5 billion cows, 1 billion pigs, 1 billion sheep, and 19 billion chickens. So this is a problem because about 2 billion people in the world are food insecure. Now, the UN, United Nations, defines food insecurity as a situation when people lack secure access to sufficient amounts of safe and nutritious food for normal growth, development, and an active and healthy lifestyle. So if you're moderately food insecure, that means you're reducing quantities or skipping meals because you can't afford or access food. And if you're severely food insecure, that means you're starting to go hungry. Okay. So what's the problem? Well, with the 22.5 billion livestock animals, these need to be fed grains. So almost half of the world's grains that we grow are used to feed these animals, not to feed people. Okay, so if we had less livestock animals, we could use that food to actually feed people. So for example, in the USA, about 56 million acres are used to grow crops for animal feed, and about 4 million are used to grow crops for human consumption. So there's a food insecurity issue around eating meat as well. So back to the question, how will food systems nutritiously and sustainably feed 9.7 billion people by 2050? Well, the United Nations has basically said we need to reduce global meat consumption to reduce the impacts on the environment, also to improve health, food security, biodiversity. So they've called for big changes in farming and eating habits so we can go ahead in a more sustainable way. And the UN have the Sustainable Development Goals, and kind of food features very heavily in the Sustainable Development Goals. So back in the UK, the Food Ethics Council recognises that there is an imbalance globally. So in the global north, we tend to eat more meat, and in the global south, we tend to eat less meat. So there needs to be a rebalancing so that people who need to eat more meat because they're not eating enough, still that needs to happen. But generally in the global north, we need to reduce our meat consumption. And again, they recognise this as a complex picture, a complex problem, and that big changes in systems will need to be managed, okay? Because reducing meat consumption will have impacts on people's livelihoods, on health, and on culture. So we need to do it in a managed way. So today we are going to look at 4 potential methods to reduce global meat consumption and their relative merits, and how acceptable you might think they are to you. So first off is taxation. So making things more expensive. Okay. So taxation is a fairly good track record in terms of changing consumer behaviour. And the question is, should we, because we've seen how intensive, environmentally damaging, particularly beef production is, should we start to make it a bit more expensive to reduce consumers buying this and maybe looking at other options? So where's the evidence for this? Taxation has got fairly good evidence around behaviour change in purchasing products. So if we look at another damaging behaviour, so smoking, so taxation has been part of a very comprehensive programme of tobacco control, and it helped to reduce smoking rates from 45% in 1974, even higher before that, down to 14.4% in 2018. So that's been effective. If we look at something more recent, we can see the soft drinks industry levy, or the sugar tax, as it's also known. And we saw that drinks high in sugar that were kind of subject to that tax, the sales fell by 50%, whereas the low sugar drinks or the no sugar drinks, actually the sales rose by 40%. So, and they reduced between 2015 and 2018, they reduced about 30% of sugars sold per capita per day. So taxation works. It's making things more expensive works. However, what's the flip side of that? So the World Health Organization says, we need to tax things by at least 20%, but we also need to subsidize the healthier choice by at least 10% to kind of change consumer behavior. Now, we know already that the affordability of healthy food, both in the UK and globally, is a problem. Many people on low incomes really struggle to buy healthy food to meet the current guidelines, and this is echoed in lots of different nations. So food affordability is a problem. So if we make something more expensive, we need to kind of subsidize something else. So, something to think about: if we go down the taxation route, what should we be subsidizing? What healthy foods should we be subsidizing so that low income consumers are not negatively impacted? Okay. So that's option one, taxation. So option two is plant-based meat alternatives. Now, we all know there's been the vegetarian option forever, for ages. But the vegetarian option has often been an option that tastes like vegetables. And meat eaters perhaps don't want that. People like the taste of meat. But developments around the kind of vegetarian option now has meant that companies are able to produce a vegetarian plant-based option that has the taste and texture of meat. So Impossible Foods, for example, uses a heme protein to mimic animal heme to make their burgers taste like meat. So why is this important? Well, if we're producing plant-based burgers that have the taste and texture of meat, so that meat eaters who don't want to stop eating meat will eat them, this will have far less impact on the environment. A study by University of Michigan showed that on the Beyond Burger showed that it generates 90% less greenhouse gases, requires less energy, has enormously less impact on water and land resources than a traditional quarter pounder made of meat. So plant-based alternatives are an option as well. So moving on from that into a more high-tech version of alternative meats, we've got lab-grown meat. So again, many people enjoy eating meat. It's important to them culturally or whatever, and they don't want to give up eating meat. So could technology give us meat that's less environmentally damaging and more ethical? So in cultured meat, lab-grown meat, animal cells are harvested, biopsy, and they're put into a solution of glucose, amino acids, vitamins and minerals, and they kind of are grown in a lab. Now, they are indistinguishable from actual meat. Okay. So would you try it? Would you try lab-grown meat? There's been studies, a number of studies have been undertaken on consumer choice and about 20 to 90% of consumers would try cultured meat, lab-grown meat, and the industry says that even 20% it is enough for them to to kind of bring this to market. The trouble is, it's kind of still fairly early days, and there's lots of technological issues to overcome. I think the company that made the first lab-grown burger, I think Mosa, their first burger cost $250,000 to produce back in 2013. So it's still early days, but researchers say that within 5 years we could start to see lab-grown meat on the shelves. And again, slightly blocked by the video, but the prediction is, so prediction from 2025 to 2040 in terms of market share. So at the moment, real meat has got 90% market share, okay, and they predict by 2040 this will reduce to 40%. The kind of vegan meat replacements that we talked about on the previous slide, that's got about a 10% market share, and that will increase by 2040 to 25%. And lab-grown meat or cultured meat coming from nowhere, they think will take a 35% share of the market by 2040. So we could see a real reduction in meat consumption from the development in technology and innovation in these two industries. And I'll come to one last kind of niche area, which is edible insects. So you might not know that already 2 billion people supplement their diet with insects. And insects have always been part of the human diet. And they have, on paper, they have a very impressive environmental and nutritional profile. So in terms of, they're incredibly efficient in terms of turning food into body weight. So they can convert 2 kilos of food into 1 kilo of mass or body weight. It would take 8 kilos of food for cattle to produce 1 kilo of weight gain. Okay, so they're very, very efficient at turning food into body weight and protein. So they produce far less greenhouse gases, and interestingly, they can be fed on bio-waste or food waste. So the food that we kind of throw away could be used to feed insects, and they turn that into high quality protein. Again, if the thought of popping a crunchy cricket into your mouth isn't that appealing, they can be ground down into powders and paste and baked in with other ingredients, so you can make bars, or you can add them in something to increase the protein content. So there's different options, and because in the West we don't have a history. We have different of eating insects. We have a different climate. We don't have a big variety of insects here. We just don't have the history here. So the biggest barrier currently in the West to eating insects is consumer disgust. So the question is, would you eat insects? So really, ultimately, there is no single solution to this problem. Each solution is going to have its market share. Some people might choose to eat a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet. Other people might choose meat alternatives, cultured meat or the vegetarian alternatives. There is no one solution to this complex problem. But essentially, we need to move away from highly intensive and environmentally damaging food, so we are able to feed the 9.7 billion people who will be on the planet in 2050. Okay, Sarah, can I
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. That's amazing. Do you want to move to the next slide? So you can, perfect. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I hope that's sort of been a nice sort of introduction to this very complex and sort of ever-changing field of food sustainability, and perhaps you have a little bit more of an idea of sort of the impact that our food choices have on our sustainability in terms of going forward. And we're really interested to hear how you guys sort of are feeling in terms of sort of the alternatives that that are available that Chris sort of suggested. So we have a couple of questions that have been pre-submitted, but we are keen for everybody to sort of give their thoughts, perhaps in the group chat, if anybody's got a question that they'd like to ask us. But I know Hannah should be with us, and will be able to sort of give us some of the pre-submitted questions. So Hannah, whilst we wait for some to come live through the chat, do you have one that we could sort of answer in terms of pre-submissions?
Brilliant. Yes, thanks Chris and Sarah. I know I've definitely learned something, so thank you for that. But yeah, as Sarah was saying, please submit any additional questions you've got on the in the chat function just below. If we've got a chance, we'll try and answer as many as we can, but we have got some pre-submitted questions. So question number 1, what is the likelihood of people accepting alternative options to meat?
That is a really good question, Chris, isn't it? In all fairness, I've just going to set up a Twitter poll, and we'll see what the answer is in due course. But Chris, what's your thoughts in terms of that? You know, how acceptable is it? You mentioned before the fact that people are actually doing it already in sort of in various parts of the world. What's your thoughts? What's your initial gut feeling?
I think in terms of the the kind of plant-based alternatives to meat, I think they're fairly acceptable already. And the more they improve and the more they have the taste and texture of meat, I think that will be a fairly easy sell, as we've seen the market shares predicted to increase. Again, lab-grown meats, I think some of the studies suggested that people who are more kind of environmentally aware of the impact of meat, which of course is a growing area. We've seen a big increase in public awareness around the environmental crisis and plastic waste. So if this continues to grow, it suggests that people who are more aware of the environmental impacts of meat are more likely to eat lab-grown meat. Again, between 20 and 90% of consumers. I think some of the issues around insects, again in the West. I mean, for us, it's kind of yucky, perhaps is a very scientific way to put it. We have issues with eating insects because we don't have a tradition of eating insects. Some of the in the East, when they eat insects, they have a kind of feelings of nostalgia of the olden days and their childhood, but we just don't have that. So consumer disgust is a fairly strong finding there. So having a plate full of crickets, it is difficult, but if you can change that into powder and create bars and other foods that don't have legs and wings sticking out for long, I think that's got some potential. So all of these things are growing markets, and there'll be plenty of money put into this. So I'm sure that the marketing gurus will work their magic, and it will become increasingly acceptable as time goes on.
I think it's really interesting, actually, particularly around the edible insects. For those that are sort of a bit more familiar in the nutrition world, we have a sort of a meeting once a year called Food Matters Live. So it's a really big event in the nutrition calendar, and actually one of the things one of the sort of sections of it is around sort of innovative new food products. And I've got colleagues that are more sort of into sort of food science and food technology and food development. And actually edible insects, like you say, Chris, in terms of sort of bars and energy bars, are already starting to come onto the market. So they're available, and there are farms. In fact, we've taken some students before to sort of some of the edible insect sort of farms where they take the edible insects and make it into sort of meat alternative products, as it were. And so it's a growing consumer market. So definitely keep an eye out on your sort of your Tesco's and your various other supermarket shop floors, because they'll be hitting it soon, if they're definitely not already in the sort of health shops.
I think Sainsbury's in 2018, I probably missed that off my slide, is that I think they started to sell Eat Grub crunchy crickets in 2018. So they're already creeping into the mainstream.
Oh, that's a good pun there, creeping. I like that. Love it. Love that. Perfect. Hannah, do you have another question at all?
Yeah, I do. Thank you both. So question number 2 is, how would you go about having a healthy plant-based diet?
Absolutely. That sort of piggybacks on the plant-based alternatives. It's really important that we think about ensuring that we have a nutritionally sound and complete plant-based diet, because we know that plant-based food, vegetarian-based food, vegan-based food, obviously traditionally is fruits and vegetables often, but we know that there are lots of sort of unhealthy prepackaged sort of foods, as much as there are healthy alternatives as well. So we did actually, it's a bit of a plug in terms of last week's, we did a sort of a whole session on plant-based diets and how to sort of make sure that they're healthy. So the big thing is really to make sure that you have a variety of foods. To make sure that we always say to our students, eat the rainbow in terms of the different types of food colors. That means that you generally have a good variety of the macronutrients and the micronutrients that you require. So that's really important. Thinking about if you're particularly vegan, there are some sort of micronutrients that you can be deficient in if you're not sort of eating them within your diet. So keeping abreast of of those types of micronutrients, particularly things like omega-3, vitamin D, vitamin B12, those tend to be the ones that we can sometimes not get quite as much of in our diets. But very, very easy to get them within the diets or within sort of additional supplementation. So there are some very easy resources, the Vegetarian Society and the Vegan Society. If you just have a quick search of those on the internet, they have really, really good resources for if you're thinking about going more plant-based diets. And of course, check out our virtual insight series that we had last week, and I'm sure Hannah will put the link to that in due course, and we have it on our social media platforms as well. So yeah, it's not as easy or not as difficult as you think. It's just a little bit more, as always with all diets, even if you're animal-based, you've got to think about it to make sure that they're nice and healthy and you're getting everything that you need. Does that help, Hannah? I think that answers the question.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we have one more question come through. So I think this is probably targeted at both of you, but how can we help reduce food waste?
Well, we thought, because we didn't quite mention it, so Chris, if you I think it's about 2 or 3 slides into the end of the presentation, I'll just bring up that, hopefully Chris can bring up the slide that we've prepared. I think it's about 3 slides down. Perfect, absolutely. So Chris, I don't know whether you want to pick out any of those in terms of food waste, or maybe even talk about it from a sustainability source.
Okay, well, there's a number of levels that we can work at. So it's kind of the macro level, the big thing. So government needs to put in place sort of legislation to make it easier for food manufacturers and restaurants, etc., to waste less, to have systems to reduce their food waste. For example, there's a charity called Fair Share, and they work with lots of big supermarkets who take food that is unsold and they kind of in tins, and they donate it to Fair Share, and then Fair Share kind of redistribute this via food banks. And we've seen that the food banks, the use of food banks have shot up in the last 5 years very significantly. So there's kind of like systems changes that can be put in place. We've got food loss, where food is lost on the farm, food is lost in transport, and then we've got food waste, where it's wasted by retailers and then consumers. So at the consumer level, there's lots of different campaigns. I mean, WRAP are an excellent charity, and they've got loads of different campaigns about having your fridge at the right temperature, how you can kind of audit your sell-by dates and learn about how you should be looking at those, and how even you can arrange stuff in your food cupboard so stuff is not shoved at the back and you forget about it, and then how to take stuff that's kind of going towards its use by date and then kind of make that into a meal, so you kind of extend the life of that food. So there's lots of different campaigns, and I would kind of signpost you towards WRAP and all their campaigns on kind of how you as a consumer can kind of educate yourself to shop, store and use food a little bit more efficiently, because a lot of those things people don't really think about, and it's quite surprising when they look through the resources. They go, oh yeah, I've done that, I need to change that, and it's quite easy to do. So that would be my advice. Have a look at WRAP's website and resources on food waste.
Absolutely. That's really good advice, Chris. And in terms of sort of, the different levels of food waste and how they all impact onto this sort of larger understanding of sustainability and our sustainability model, we need to look at what's coming in as well as what's coming out, not only just as an individual, but at that global level as well. And I fully support Chris in terms of the WRAP resources. They're really great. I guess from a sort of nutrition perspective, one of the big things that we know is a big contributor to sort of food waste is this understanding the difference between use by and best before dates. And I'll just pick up on that, and it's one of the ones on the screen that you can see in the middle. Use by date and best before. So best before is the dates where the manufacturer sets, which basically means that it's going to be the best quality if you consume it before this date. Okay, but it doesn't mean that you can't consume it after that best before date has passed. Okay, so it's not unsafe to eat if you eat something that's had a best before date previously. Okay, whereas the use by date, that means that it is potentially not safe to eat. Now, there are some individuals that say you can ignore the use by date and you use your smell and your senses and all that sort of stuff. And absolutely, if you're available to do that, then that's absolutely fine for you. But by law, the use by date is one that is set so that the consumer it has food safety. Okay, so that's the difference. If you see something that says it's best before, then you can still consume that product after that date, but we wouldn't recommend anybody using something after the use by date. Okay, that's there and lies the difference. All right, and often what we find that people sort of waste or get rid of food just based on the best before date, and actually it's still perfectly edible to eat. It might be a little bit dry around the edges, particularly if it's a bread product, but there's lots of ways in which we can still consume that very safely indeed. Okay, so those are, I think that's the sort of tip that I would give for anybody, particularly from a sort of individual level, for sure. Hannah, sorry,
just to give you the website for WRAP, it's wrap.org.uk, and it's WRAP, and that would be the sign. Have a look at their website. They've got some great stuff on food waste.
Perfect. Thank you, Chris. Could you just go back to the social media slide, please? Hannah, do you have any other questions or thoughts, or anybody from the audience, in fact? Does anybody have anything that they'd like to chip in, or any other suggestions in terms of, where to think about food sustainability, or sort of top tips when it comes to food waste?
Brilliant. Thanks, Sarah and Chris. We've not had any other questions come through, but as Sarah said at the beginning of this presentation, the filming and recording of this will be available in the next couple of days, and that'll be available on the Solent University YouTube channel. So please keep an eye out there. We will be following up with an email as well to you all, just with a short feedback form. We'd really appreciate your participation in that, just to get your thoughts around the Virtual Insight series. So over to you, Sarah, and thank you all again for attending.
Perfect. So just a final few words from us. Thank you so much for you guys to being involved. It's been a pleasure to talk about this really important topic. And obviously, Chris and I are very passionate about this area, and we really do invite you guys to be part of the conversation, but also be part of the change as well. It's not just one individual person that's going to make this sort of crisis or this situation that we have better. We all have to pull together and pull in the right direction. So please do get involved. By all means, follow us and connect with us on the Solent Nutrition social media outputs, in terms of sort of Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so on and so forth. We will be making a link to this presentation, so you can go back and look at it again in future dates and maybe have a look at those top tips that we gave as well. But by all means, this leaves me with the last few things to say, and say thank you so much to being with us, and join us again in the new year for some more Virtual Insight series when it comes to nutrition. Thank you very much all for listening.